Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the USGS National Climate Adaptation Science Center and the National Conservation Training Center. To introduce our speakers and give us more information on this webinar series, we have Ann Kinsinger, the USGS Associate Director of Ecosystems, on with us today. Welcome, Ann, and take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us today. This is the opening session of this webinar series on Indigenous Knowledges, and it's hosted by the USGS National Climate Adaptation Science Center in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service National Conservation Training Center, the USGS Office of Tribal Relations, and the Climate Adaptation Science Center's Tribal Climate Resilience Liaisons. Just a little background, I am the Associate Director for the Ecosystems Mission Area at USGS, but I'm also on point for USGS for Indigenous Knowledges, and I did serve on the interagency working group that in December of 2020 released its first government-wide guidance on how federal agencies can ethically acknowledge and include Indigenous knowledges into science management and decision-making. Through this webinar series and other actions, USGS and our partner bureaus seek to recognize and promote Indigenous knowledges as a valued and valid form of evidence for inclusion in federal policy, research, and decision-making throughout the Department of Interior. So we're hoping the series will be informative to anybody interested in Indigenous knowledges, Indigenous engagement, conservation, and environmental management. Through the series, we're especially seeking to elevate federal employees' understanding of Indigenous knowledges in order to build better partnerships with Indigenous peoples. The series is also intended to assist tribal citizens and Indigenous people seeking to understand the resources and opportunities available to them for collaborating with federal partners. This is the first of a 5-part series that starts with today's session on understanding what are Indigenous knowledges, with further sessions highlighting the federal guidance I just mentioned, as well as best practices and more. And we certainly know there's still a lot of work to do to ensure Indigenous knowledges are included into the science planning and implementation processes from start to finish, and that this is done in a meaningful and respectful way that facilitates trust with tribal and Indigenous partners. To succeed, we're going to have to find another way to assure that we are implementing our trust responsibility with sovereign tribal nations. We hope you enjoy this series, and I look forward to learning from our speakers today and in the sessions ahead. So again, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ann. And now we have April Taylor, the South Central Climate Adaptation Center Tribal Liaison, who will give us a little bit of information about this beautiful artwork that we have, especially for this series. Thanks, April.
Yeah, so as the planning team started planning this webinar series, we wanted to have an image that represented Indigenous knowledge. And so this image, which is a beautiful image, done by Coral Avery, which is a native that's in the Northwest Cask, and she developed this image, and I'm just going to read what she wrote. Although one image cannot fully encapsulate the expanse of Indigenous knowledge, this visual intended to show the connection of native species and Indigenous cultures stretching from the Pacific Islands to the East Coast of the U.S. It includes the medicine wheel to symbolize the health, prosperity of people and environment. Turtle Island, which symbolizes either North America or both North and South America, depending on the storyteller, and water surrounds the image. It sustains all life. Inspiration was taken from native storytelling and personal connections that members of this webinar series planning team and the artist have with these species and symbols. This visual was created by Coral Avery at the BIA Tribal Climate Resilience branch and Northwest Tribal Climate Adaptation Science Center, with the support of the webinars planning team. So with that, I will be doing introduction of our panelists today, and then I'll be turning it over to them. So our first panelist is Melanie Montano. She is a mother, a grandmother, and an enrolled member of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and the traditional ecological knowledge outreach specialist for the Great Lakes Indian and Fish and Wildlife Commission, or GLFWIC, where she helps assess climate change impacts on treaty resources and potential threats to Ojibwe culture and lifeways. She is a grad student at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, in Natural Resource Science and Management program under the Forestry Department. Prior to GLFWIC, she was Red Cliff's Environmental Programs Manager, where she has also served in various committees, including EPA's Regional Tribal Operations Committee, Alliance for Sustainability, Treaty Natural Resources, and Integrated Resource Management Plan, and is currently serving on the Great Lakes Compact Commission. She holds a BS in Healthcare Administration with a Native American Environmental Studies emphasis. Lastly, and most importantly, she is a lifelong student of her cultural ways. We also have Dr. Dan Wildcat with us today, and he is a Yuki member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma. He's the director of the Haskell Environmental Research Studies, HERS Center, and member of the Indigenous and American Studies program at Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. In 2013, he was the Gordon Russell Visiting Professor of Native American Studies at Dartmouth College. Dr. Wildcat received an interdisciplinary PhD from the University of Missouri at Kansas City. In 1994, he partnered with the Hazardous Substance Research Center at Kansas State University to create the Haskell Environmental Research Studies HERS Center and subsequently start the HERS Summer Undergraduate Research Program with KU professor Dr. Joan Nagel. He is noted speaker on traditional knowledge and has offered programs for many agencies, including NOAA, NASA, AGU, ECA, NCAR, and many scientific organizations and universities. And so with that, I will turn it over to them.
Always make the mistake of forgetting to unmute myself. So yes, Sonlay, thank you so much, April. Appreciate that nice introduction. And I'll start by saying about where I'm sitting right now. I'm sitting probably less than a half a mile from the south bank of the Kansas River as it meanders across the northern edge of Lawrence, Kansas, and a little over 2 miles from the north bank and the wetlands of the Wakarusa River. I want to honor that water and the alluvial soils I sit on, because both those rivers and those soils provide the water for my family here in Lawrence, Kansas. And it's just an honor to be here to think about those first earth keepers of this place, the people of the Kaw Nation, the Osage, and many others who kind of passed through here during their movements on this eastern edge of the great grassland prairies. And so again, special thanks and a special recognition for the power of this place, this land, and again, just delighted to be here as a part of this program. And so, Melanie, where are you sitting right now?
I feel like I'm in the middle of kind of nowhere and everything at the same time. I say that because I'm on the road going to grad school. I'm back and forth between the Twin Cities and my home reservation of Red Cliff, very top of Wisconsin, every week. So I'm kind of back and forth, and sometimes I feel really frazzled, but it's an interesting question and an important question, of course, which leads into our conversation, because for me, the one thing that grounds me is to stop and think about where I am.
Yeah.
And think about, where I come from and where I can always return to. So physical location right now, I'm probably only about an hour from home. So
Mhm.
just, let's see, just east of Duluth, Minnesota area a little bit.
Yeah.
So home of my people, the Ojibwe people, of course, which came from the east and migrated west as they followed the food that grows on water and kind of ended up in this whole region near the Great Lakes and everything.
Mhm.
And it's also, I'd like to acknowledge the other tribes that have been here throughout time, the Lakotas and the other groups in our area. Currently, we have several different tribal people, Potawatomis, Menominees, you name it. And this area definitely draws a lot of people
Mhm.
because of the lake, but also because of just the dynamic ecosystems here. And so
Sure.
with that, I want to give credit to the lands that are here and not just the trees, the birds, the water and everything, but also the spirits that reside in these areas that we know and may not yet know and may yet to meet in the future. Because I often think, without them, I wouldn't be grounded, but also without them, we wouldn't still be here on this earth. And so I often think about land acknowledgments and think about how important they are, but how to truly think about them and believe them and not just use words, but really think about where we are and why that's important. And so I just want to ask everybody to sort of silently, take a moment to think about that as you listen to us and everything, and think about not only where you are, but also where your roots come from. So thanks for that, Dan.
Yeah, well, listen, I think there are some of us, who've suffered removal and relocation, and that's sort of the story of my people, my Zoyaha, my Yuchi people, who are federally recognized as a part of the Creek Nation. But this importance of place, and I think this is what we need to talk about, to get started. When we think of indigenous knowledges, we're not going to give the definition. There are a range of definitions that people use, even among indigenous people. But let's start with sort of talking about, and I'll let you kick it off. What's your sense of that importance of place in understanding indigenous knowledges?
Yeah, first of all, before I get to that, I want to emphasize or remind people, as you probably noticed, that the S is used on Indigenous knowledge, and that's definitely for a reason, because there is no one Indigenous knowledge,
Right.
and there is no one set definition for Indigenous knowledges. So difficult to define, but just because of the human in me, and I make mistakes, I tend to sometimes drop the S and have the S, and so just
Yeah.
know that when I go back and forth, that I intend all knowledges, and I sometimes use different terms for it as well. And I think one reason I bring that up is because when we speak about Indigenous knowledges, we don't actually have that set term in English. And part of the reason is because English just can't even encompass it all.
Right.
English can't speak to it properly, but that can come from our languages. And our languages come from our lands. There's a direct interconnection between all of them. And so therefore, our knowledges that we carry directly come from our connections to those lands. And knowledges, for as Indigenous people, and I like to think about it as anybody really, everybody has a sense of place. Everybody needs a sense of place, sometimes kind of gets lost or disconnected from that, but you can always return to the land for that. And I think about, the way that we've been able to survive as a people is through that Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous knowledges, which is, when you think about it, understanding skills, philosophies, about how to survive off of the land and everything that it holds throughout time. And those knowledges have been passed down for centuries, through generations, and with Indigenous people often orally, of course, through stories, through songs, through language, all sorts of other ways. So for me, when I think about Indigenous knowledges, I think about, yes, our direct connection to these lands and our identity, which brings us to our sense of place, because we can't have a sense of place if we don't know where we stand, where we are. And therefore, who are we? Because we're
Mhm.
made up of these lands, our connections to them.
Yeah, I think that's really a point worth dwelling on here for a second, because I've been thinking about a lot of those issues in the kind of world that we inhabit now. Now, we have people increasingly working off smart devices, iPads, even phones, even laptops. And it seems to me those are strange kind of spaces, because you can be, everywhere and nowhere, and you're in this virtual space. Now, I'm glad we have it right now. We're able to talk, we're able to discuss this, but there is a danger, I think, in this kind of increasingly technologically oriented technosphere. Even, geologists now say, well, we've got a technosphere that's laying on top of the biosphere, that it's worth emphasizing, I think. My dear friend and mentor, Vine Deloria Jr., always liked to talk about, he said, the fundamental feature of indigenous metaphysics was power plus place equals personality. And you can apply that to what you described so eloquently, the fact that the cosmos, the universe, is alive. It's not empty space. And sometimes those particles are so small, we can't see them with the naked eye, but we now know there's really no such thing as empty space. There is, even if it's this minute, micro particles of energy that are there, we're surrounded by that. But the way we experience that is in a particular place, and each of us are going to experience something unique. And I always thought that, you could apply that to individuals, but then, Vine and I would talk about the fact this really gets around to the fact why I think you're correct. We're mindful of always using the plural when we talk about traditional knowledges or traditional ecological knowledges, that there just isn't one. It's not a one size fits all, but that, our knowledges, those ancient knowledges that we have received and in some ways been gifted with, thankfully, is a product of this kind of symbiotic relationship between a place and a people. And I think that's really interesting, because I know in my Zoya Ha traditions, we took our social organization, from those different than human persons. So we have a wind clan, we have a deer clan. We identify ourselves, with those plants and animals, and create a clan system. So it's almost like we are acknowledging that we are related. And I really loved what you said, because I think that is that symbiotic relationship. To me, that's one of the most important things for people to understand if they want to understand indigenous knowledges.
Definitely. Those were all wonderful words. And, it makes me think when you speak about the clans too, for the Ojibwe people, we do the same thing. And we really think about how we're related to those beings around us. And that makes me think often about, say you have this uncle that's the most favorite uncle, and you want to have dinner with him and things like that. And would you disrespect him either knowingly or not at times? Would you treat him bad? Would you, or would you honor him? Would you gift him and things?
Right.
And that's, we do that with our non-human relatives as well.
Exactly.
Including what people refer to as invasive species, which I really struggle with a lot of times, because those are just non-local beings, that are residing elsewhere, just like us.
Right.
So yeah, there are relatives too. And so I love the idea of relatives. And I think that's something important for people to understand when they look at indigenous knowledges, because a lot of our foundational understanding has to do with how we're related, not just with each other as people, but with all of the beings on this earth and we're still learning what those relationships are, what they look
Right.
like, what they mean, how to honor them, and everything as well too, especially as we start to return to our
Mhm.
cultural ways that have
Yeah.
unfortunately been, suppressed by the ways of the government and all of
Mhm.
those rough things, which in turn has caused a lot of historical trauma.
Yeah.
But when I think of that as well, I often think about how we can begin to heal with that historical trauma, and it's by returning to those lands and learning about our relatives and how we can work with them and
Yeah.
be good people on this earth while we're here.
Yeah, you've really hit on something I want to draw out a little bit, and we can talk about this. But so the big picture evolutionary scientists and earth scientists are now saying we are living in the age of humans, the Anthropocene. And so far, by the way, the age of humans hasn't been real good for other life on this planet, for the air quality, soil quality, water quality. And I think there's something that indigenous knowledges or traditional ecological knowledges offer us that is really, really important. It's what you said about honoring the life around us, and not as resources, but really thinking about what it means to have a respectful relationship with the land, the air, the water, the plants and animals. And I'm not apologetic or afraid to say that, I really believe in this century, and as we're well into the depths of the Anthropocene and global climate change, that the wisdom that I think indigenous people are ready to share with those who will try to understand and respect the knowledge and build, meaningful and trusting relationships is exactly this kind of knowing, because it puts an emphasis on the importance of relationships, and really it points out that what we know is in these kinds of systems of thought are the absolute opposite of anthropocentric thinking, because it's not all about us. It's about what's the nature of the relationship we have with these different than human relatives. And I think that's just so important now, because we've seen what happens when people build social institutions and societies that are all about us, humans. It's not a pretty picture so far. And I think indigenous knowledges can operate as the antidote to that kind of destruction. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely, which makes me think about, the way academic systems are set up. And I've been, letting people know that's part of the reason why it took so long to pursue a master's degree, because I
Sure.
really feared the way that academia was carved out. I feared pursuing something in the Western sciences, even though that's where my passion is, when it would be something that I would basically have to take a track on through books, through,
Yeah.
removal of the lands and things. Like I have found it so ironic where, say biology back in middle school, you learn all about biology in the
Yeah.
classroom from a book rather than going out onto the lands and things. And yeah, it's definitely about the only way we're truly going to learn about them. We can study them, through various forms of research and all, and learning from other people and stuff. But what about us collectively getting back out there and observing a lot of those ones and rebuilding those relationships? And it makes me think of the beaver in particular, and how they're their own beings. However, they share a lot of characteristics that humans do, and their stories in our culture that talk about how we used to have conversations with them. And right now, the way they have actually shifted is showing a form of historical trauma. And a lot of it is because they're experiencing the separation and the suffering from the relationship, the direct, like strong relationship they once had with us as humans, and they're not conversing with us anymore. We're not conversing with them.
Right.
And so we've stepped into this very human-centric place as we move forward, even though as a society, we're waking up and realizing that we have to be better stewards and we have to be careful on, you know, the way we move forward, and we have to think about a lot of like the problems we've caused out there in order to return to a good way of life, in order to survive. So, you know, as humans, we're always making mistakes, but it's
Right.
never too late to wake up. And
Yeah.
we have to not necessarily think like the animals or anything, because
No.
we don't have that right. However, think about, yes, our relationship with them and our role as humans, like what are we to do to be good stewards as we're here, and not focus just on us as humans, like you say, because when you think about the order of creation too,
Yeah.
in a lot of the indigenous cultures, the humans were placed on this earth last, and we had all these wonderful, amazing gifts before us. And so, you know, the earth was doing fine without us humans. I mean,
Yeah, you know, I really like what you said, you know, about how we treat our relatives and with respect, and human and different than human. And I think it's this relationality that's the most exciting thing about Indigenous knowledges. So let's kind of talk a little bit about how maybe by thinking about what really Indigenous knowledges are, how that can be instructive to us working well with scientists. So I've been in a situation and really been fortunate at Haskell Indian Nations University now for about 2 decades to build relationships with scientists in some of the leading, you know, federal agencies that have scientists, EPA, USGS, you know, scientific centers like the National Center for Atmospheric Research, even NASA and NOAA. And what I think is important is that when people start talking about, well, how do we engage and how can we respectfully, you know, gain insight and I don't even like the term acquire, but let's say respectfully use traditional or Indigenous knowledges. I think the key is that you just have to be mindful. I'm just heading up a major NSF grant to create a Coastlines and Peoples Research Center here at Haskell called the Rising Voices Changing Coast. You know about Rising Voices, the Rising Voices Changing Coast Research Hub. And we're putting traditional knowledge holders, Indigenous knowledge holders on the ground, knowledge holders with some of the best climate modelers and physical scientists in the world, you know. And what I'm seeing is, you know, one of the things, and I loved what you said about your graduate education, because I went through the same thing. I started a PhD once and then stopped out because I just could not fit in that system, and then came back about 10 years later when I had people who were really supporting me and advocating for, you know, what I wanted to do. But the point I wanted to make is that we've been saying, as we've started our research hub, that you have to sometimes go slow to go fast. It takes time to build relationships. And as you know, and you've experienced, I know probably in your tribal nation and among your people, you can't build a relationship if you're an outside institution walking through the door and saying, hey, we've got this request for proposals, it's due in 30 days, and we want to really partner with you. Well, you're not, we don't know you. Who are you? Why are you coming here? I think one of the challenges we need to talk about is maybe some of the institutional changes that are going to have to occur so that people can really build responsible and respectful relationships, so you can have the trust then to honestly share. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you hit on a key point when you said institutional changes, because that's it. It's with the people as individuals, but it's also the entire system and systems. And when we talk about, the agencies going into communities and saying like, hey, I have so many days and I need to get this in, and what do you say? And they haven't built those relationships. Majority of the time, those projects don't work out well if they even have the support to apply for them,
Right.
say grants, for example, and move forward. And with me, it often reminds me of historically, that's how things have been done. We think about the researchers that have come to our communities. We think about, the Bureau of Indian Affairs that has come to
Mm-hmm.
our worlds, I'll say. And, they've attempted to do different things, bring about policy or whatever, and they say that they're consulting, or they say
Right.
that they've gotten feedback or whatever, but they haven't spent the time to move slowly to build those relationships. And again, it makes me think about an uncle or a neighbor.
Yeah.
If you're gonna say you want to put up a fence and you share lands, are you just gonna do it when you've never had a conversation with that person before? Well, some people may. However, one of the best, most effective ways would be to start building a relationship with them, have a conversation, and maybe you won't even want a fence after that point,
Yeah. Right.
But I think about, in the guidance document that came out of the White House, they
Yeah.
talk about the tribal adaptation menu in there as one of the tools, which I was thankful to be a co-author of,
Yeah.
and we call ourselves the TAM fam, those of us that are authors, because we're like a family, and we're not just a family of Indigenous people, we're a family of, people that work for the feds, and
Yeah.
we're other folks too. And when we first came to the table, we're on opposite sides of the table. We really didn't have a trust there.
Mhm.
And as time went and we built relationships literally over having meals together, eventually we realized like we have a lot of things in common, and we also have a common goal here. And because of that, that's where the tribal adaptation menu came from. And there's a particular section in there that talks about that relationship building. And one of the reasons why it was referenced as a tool and a example of how to work with this Indigenous knowledges of people is because of the relationships that it talks about. And deadlines at the end of the day should not matter. Money should not matter if you're not taking the time to build those relationships, and
Right.
if you're not doing it with good intentions. And
Mhm.
also, a lot of time, I think what gives federal agencies the right to think that they can, sit at their desk and think about some wonderful solution for a community that they've never stepped foot on, or, they don't even know the people there. So it's best to really fully immerse yourself. And as I've sat on things like Regional Tribal Operations
Right.
Committee and, worked with the regional director of EPA and things like that, I've asked them all the time, like, please come to our lands. Like, we'll go out ricing. I mean, we'll,
Right.
get
Yeah.
in the sugar bush. We'll do all these things. And that's where it begins, is really by getting to know each other, so you can break down a lot of those barriers, but also then be more effective in the work that you're doing and have better outcomes.
Yes, I mean, so, a couple of things that strike me, and again, this is just kind of an introductory lecture, and I think you'd agree with me. We're not the experts on Indigenous knowledges. I don't know that there are any, but a little bit. And I've thought about this, because again, I've kind of been working that boundary between tribal peoples, our nations, and then scientific organizations here for about 2 decades. And it strikes me that one of the things that is important to explain is that part of the distrust that has, been generated over a long period of time, sometimes by Indigenous communities, regarding scientists is one, the way that they do things. They just, you come in and you say, oh, here's what we're going to do for you, and here's the questions, and acting like, the people that live there, have nothing to offer, or you haven't even asked them if that's the question you're interested in asking is important to them, and think about that. That is a difficult thing to overcome if you're going to come in and tell someone what their problem is and you don't even know them. And that's kind of what you do when you create research agendas without any input from the people on the ground. You've got to have that input, and we have people with deep knowledge and understanding of what the issues are that are most pressing where they live. And so one of the things that I think is worth maybe discussing a little bit is how, people talk about free, prior, and informed consent. So, we have, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it set as a standard free, prior, and informed consent. But I think one of the things that we always have to emphasize is that if we agree, because we know you and we trust you, to share certain kinds of knowledge with you, that doesn't give you a right to use it any way you see fit. In fact, I think one of the things about our relational kind of view of the world is we always couple inalienable rights, at least in my Zoya Ha traditions, with inalienable responsibilities. You have responsibilities when you acquire certain knowledge. And a lot of people in the dominant society don't think that way. They think, oh, it's just knowledge. I can use it any way I want. And I think that's really an issue for many Indigenous people. Can I trust you to use this knowledge in a good way, not an extractive way, not just a way to make more money, but a way that is respectful of the life and, those other co-creators of knowledge that have allowed us, to understand something about the water, about the forest, about, the wild rice, about the fish. And so what's your thought on that? I mean, this issue of responsibilities, I think that's something we really need to dive into.
I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I could speak about it for days because, and part of it is because I've seen so many problems throughout time with it and people not understanding it, people being hurt, our knowledge being taken and used wrongly and things like that. And I often think about, it's the term for free, prior, informed consent is just like so strange when you think about it within itself. However, it's so highly important. And you hit on a major point with it. Like if somebody comes to me, for example, and brings me tobacco, brings me gifts, whatever, or maybe they don't bring me anything and they ask for something and I share that knowledge with them. But when they came, they said it was maybe because they're writing this document. And then 5 years later, I see it used in all these different things and misconstrued and misused. And I think that does go back to those relationships again. Once you are able to start building those relationships, it shouldn't stop there. You should maintain those relationships, like you maintain taking care of your car. If you want to be able to use your car, you have to be able to maintain it. And if you abuse it, if it gets run down and things, you're not going to have that on the road. And so you need to do the same thing with the people, especially the Indigenous people who have had a lot of these things taken from us, like the Indigenous Knowledges. And the other thing I often think about is when you ask for knowledge and you take it and use it in a way that you didn't intend, or you misuse it, you're not only disrespecting that individual that you sought that knowledge from, but you're disrespecting the teachers that they obtained
Right.
the knowledge from. You're disrespecting those spirits that may have brought that knowledge to them through a dream. And so the damages may be unseen at times. However,
Mhm.
the damages can be huge and have a major ripple effect throughout time if you don't make sure you're protecting that information that
Yes.
you've obtained. If you don't make sure that, you know, you're taking well care of those people that have helped to provide those things to you too. And, you know, I think about like a lot of times when there's certain health assessments done or things like that, and we have an epidemiologist who comes into the community and they write these reports, and then all of a sudden there's like movies made about the natives on the res that are suffering all these things. And you know, I've seen like some of these films being done and there's people that are making money off of them. However, some of the people that they actually sought that knowledge from and interviewed are literally going day by day trying to figure out how to get food on their table. They're thinking about surviving. They're thinking about how they can use their knowledge to return back to the land to be able to continue to survive. And like we're in this absolute survival mode. And so to like just think of knowledge as a resource. We talked about earlier to not think about, you know, animals and plants and all those things that are resources. Same thing as Indigenous knowledges. It's not a resource.
Yes.
Knowledges are a gift. Knowledges are an honor to be able to exchange. It's really interesting. I don't know, I can't speak to other Indigenous languages, but in the Ojibwe language, we have different names for stories depending on what types they are. And
Yeah.
our different names, depending on the types, are actually animate. Like
Mhm.
the idea that some of our stories, therefore our knowledges, are living beings,
Yeah.
like that says a lot.
You know, it really does. And you know, I like the way you put that so eloquently. It made me think of you know, our dear friend Robin Wall Kimmerer. When I interviewed her about this time last year for a program here sponsored by the Hall Center for Humanities at Kansas University, it struck me about halfway through our discussion. I said, you know, Robin, let me bounce something off of you. But the way you're framing this knowledge that you have received, that it seems to me your perspective involves what I told her was the 3 G's. I said, it's acknowledging gifts with gratitude. And then here's where the catch is. You express that gratitude with generosity. And I loved what you said about, you know, it's kind of, how telling is this, is that often when we honor people, and today it might be done at something like a, you know, a powwow event, a public event like that. How interesting is it that the people honored in traditional ways that way, what do? They do a giveaway. It's not like, what do I receive? You honor that head lady dancer, that head man dancer at a powwow, and their families come up and they do giveaways, blankets, food, you know, different things to those relatives, human relatives that have supported them and given them that honor. I think about that. So I tell Robin, I think, you know, you're doing science that is about knowledge as gifts, as the importance of expressing gratitude, that mindfulness, and then the generosity. And I think where we get hung up is there are a lot of people that are a little bit hesitant, Indigenous people, to share because they don't sense an understanding that this isn't, as you said so well, about another extractive activity. Oh, I'm going to collect something that's useful to use. Here's another resource. You know, indigenous knowledges, and let's go use it and apply it. No, it's not about collecting, it's about respecting. And that gets us right back to this relationality. So it's almost like our knowledge system, many of our indigenous knowledge systems are built on that beginning point as, you know, our Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota relatives say, I love this phrase. You'll hear in their invocations, Mitakuweyase. They pray for all of our relations. They're not just talking about human relations. They're talking about all of this that we are involved in, and that none of us had to fill out a credit application before we came into this world. We're given the benefit that we're credit worthy, but we've got to show respect, recognize the gifts, show gratitude, and then you do that through generosity. So I hope we're reaching a place to where we can really start having those kinds of honest discussions so that we can, we desperately need to work together. That's what we're trying to do in this NSF Research Hub we're creating at Haskell's. Really bring, you know, the best Western trained scientists together with people who know that knowledge of their place and say, you know, it's not either or. It's not like which one is better or which one is right. It's rather to say, we're a lot better off the more knowledge we have. And so they can be very complementary and give us a better understanding of some of the issues that we are facing on the planet today. Yeah, so thank you for that. What's if you had one other or a couple other things you'd like people to understand about indigenous knowledges, what would be some of the things you would want to emphasize?
Well, a couple things. One thing when I think about knowledges, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but you know, indigenous knowledge is not just this thing that you can put in a box or put in a paper, but knowledges are dreams, gifts from the spirits, their values, their, you know, our ceremonies, way of life, hunting, fishing, and gathering, and all those things. But I want to go back to a point too, when you talked about, you know, the efforts that you're doing with Rising Voices and things, because when it comes to the scientific knowledge, and, you know, this has been a learning experience for myself too. When I was young, I was really interested in scientific world, and that's why I became environmental programs manager and things. But then I started like seeing how things were structured and they weren't working for me, and I really struggled with them. However, one thing I'm doing now with my, you know, path with grad school is coming back to the table with those Western scientists. And as you said, we're helping to complement each other and learning from each other. And sometimes I think about Western scientific knowledge. I often, and this is maybe a little bit too abstract, but I often wonder if scientific Western knowledge, and lack of terms, but is an indigenous knowledge in itself, because maybe it's knowledge that has been out there for a while, but it's been trying to come out. But the people that are basically obtaining it and using it, they're not looking at it through the right lens. They're not treating it the right way. They're looking at it as a resource. They're not using their values when they're working with it. You know, the indigenous values of, you talk about respect and gifting and things like that, because it kind of brings me to those knowledges that we all have. You touched on it earlier a little bit, but those knowledges, you know, that I hold, for example, are not mine. They're not mine to keep. They're not for me to just survive solely, but they're for me to share, to give, to, like, you know, learn as I go. And my knowledge has changed. Like, the knowledge I have now isn't something that I had, you know, 10 years ago and before that. And it's always forever changing. And as the Western scientists do too, they learn as they go. They have, you know, different approaches. However, we can all come together with that. And so I often wonder, like, you know, the messages that they're receiving as scientists and how they're learning these things, like we aren't to say, and we don't know that maybe they're starting to get these understandings, these great hypotheses of things that us indigenous people have been talking about forever, like water is life, things like that, until science proves it. maybe they're actually getting these messages from the spirits and things, but they don't know it because they
Right.
think they're functioning in this very like westernized type colonized approach. And I think that if we all kind of open up our eyes to who we are and how we can work together, maybe some of those things will be revealed as we go. And I just want to make one last point to that too, when you talk about our friend Robin, because I love how she speaks to that so well too, and why she did write Braiding Sweetgrass in her other books, and why she does go out and present. It's not because she's, trying to make this like identity for herself necessarily, but she's trying to help share these gifts that she was given because she knows they're not hers to keep. And
Right.
she was reminded along the way as she learned things like share these with other people.
Right.
And so again, it's like a lot of us Indigenous people are here and we want to share that knowledge and we want, to be able to help with these things, but we have to be asked in a good way and our knowledge has to be respected and it has to be used in a good way, depending on, what you want to use it for. And so I think at the foundation of that to keep in mind is those values of Indigenous people, the respect, honesty, kindness, reciprocity, all those things, because that's what we need to function from.
And that's so important. And I want to problematize something that I think is something that again would be important. You kind of touched on it earlier, and it reminded me of again the fact that traditional ecological knowledges were never taught in a kind of formal pedagogy. No one got up and gave a lecture about, well, here's the principles of indigenous knowledge and wisdom. In fact, it took me a long time. You know how young men can be. I somehow, my father got much wiser the older I got. He tried to tell me a lot of things when I was young, and I just wasn't paying attention. But he wasn't telling me with words. I want to talk about embodied knowledge and why this really goes to the issue of values, and it also goes to one of the challenges we have. So I remember years ago, my dear friend, some of you in this webinar undoubtedly know Oscar Coagli, or the name. He wrote a beautiful book on a Yupik science, and he was a Yupik scholar and elder. And I was in a discussion one time, and we were always talking about science, about different ways of knowing, and apparently sometimes we'd even get into the real professional jargon of ontologies and epistemologies. And he said to me one time, he said, Dan, if you want to understand our Yupik ways, you need to come to fish camp with me. And he says, if you come to fish camp with me and my family during the salmon runs and harvest, he says, you'll learn everything you need to know about my Yupik worldview. And I thought about that, and it just hit me. Yeah, it's not like our people sat around and gave lectures, but that this knowledge is really embedded in how people live in their life ways. In some ways, it's almost the perfect embodiment of what John Dewey railed against in modern education, and that was, this horrible separation from knowing and doing. Because I think about, those of your relatives who, were mindful of the wild rice and watching the wild rice and praying, for the rice and receiving the knowledge that rice and the importance of that water, gave them. It's like that is all embodied in what they did. And so this can cause a problem because I think scientists are so used to someone saying, oh, here's what our knowledge is. And our knowledge holders don't give lectures about what our knowledge is. You need to spend time with them. You need to see what they're doing and how they're doing it. And you gain that knowledge. It really is embodied. And I think sometimes that can be a challenge again for Western science that tend to think, in terms of experiments as opposed to experience. And I think, anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. What are your thoughts?
I'm enjoying this entire conversation. I know I have that thought. No, it brings me back to when I was growing up, and I spent a lot of time with elders, and part of it was just because I loved them, like their stories and bringing them pie and just like hearing all these wild things. And I swear often I was born in a different era or something like that as well. Or this is my second life, because like I'm just so like I feel in my element when I listen to them. However, I would feel even better because they would talk to me about, what we use to make our traditional tobacco, or what we use as a cancer medicine, how we perform certain ceremonies and things like that. But the most effective was actually going out with them and learning how to gather, going out with my oldest brother, running a trap line with him, learning those skills on how to trap. And I could read, at that time, we still had a set of encyclopedias when I was a kid, and which nobody even knows what they are anymore. But I could read all those kind of encyclopedias, and sure, I could gather knowledge from them, but it really didn't feel the same, but it also didn't resonate with me as much and sit with me as much until I was actually, hands-on doing these type of things.
Right.
And it makes me think about our Ojibwe language. It's a verbal language. Majority of it is verbs. That's because the Anishinaabe people were always doing. And now as we've come to technology and all these things, we're doing a lot less. And so some ways I wonder if we're kind of going backwards, if we're de-learning in a sense, because we're going into this whole other world with technology and things, and we need to get back to the lands. And I know we mentioned a little bit earlier too about like the systematic trouble and shifts that need to happen. And I know there's a lot of, people that work for the federal agencies that, are like this, for example, they're obligated now to learn about Indigenous knowledge and help to implement it in things. But I feel like the entire system needs to support those individuals in actually getting out and doing these things as well. And in other words, like, these webinars are wonderful and I wish we could be in person, and I understand that we can't. But the better way would like get these federal people out on those rice beds, get these federal people, out in the sugar bush and gathering the medicines and things. And of course, in a respectful way, and knowing that you're not going to be taught everything, but you might be taught a few things that, the person thinks you need to know. And University of Minnesota has this, project that's been a really good example, because unfortunately, throughout the years, they had some negative work that had impacted the tribes pretty heavily with wild rice. And, and as a result of some of the negative work they've done, they've tried to move forward in a positive way by building a collective of people, tribal members, and having these tribal partners coming together, and the tribal partners help to drive what research needs to be done on wild rice. And for one of the initial trainings of those researchers, we told them, like, this can't just be about us coming to the Twin Cities and talking about wild rice and telling you all about it, that everything we know about it, but we're going to get you out on these rice beds. And sure enough, they have been. And it's been amazing watching these people, like, the scientists from the University of Minnesota, their eyes just open and them really realize who wild rice is as a being.
Yes. Yeah, and that gets down to that thing of personality. And so so my mentor, he quite an incredible intellect. I mean, people say, well, you know, Vine Deloria was a great indigenous intellect. No, I'm telling you, he will be recognized in generations to come as one of the great intellects of the 20th century. But you know, he came up with this after 30 years of wrestling with what we've been talking about. This idea, no, the basic, he said, and again, it's a simplification like most axioms are. The basic principle of indigenous metaphysics, he said, was power plus place equals personality. And so if you apply that to individuals, you get it. You know how all of the relations shaped us, made us who we are. And a lot of that's functions of where we were at a particular time, who we were with. And if you apply that then to peoples, to our tribal peoples, you begin to see why we have such incredible diversity. You know, why we're not all the same. You know, Anishinaabe and Ojibwe people are not like the Pueblos and the Dene of the Southwest. Now, in 7th grade, after most kids get their first U.S. geography course, you could give kids a quiz about clothing, food, houses for peoples, you know, the first peoples of those places, and they could tell you right away. Well, of course, those, you know, Anishinaabe people don't live like the people on Second Mesa in Arizona. No, the Seminole are very different because they live in incredible wetlands complex now called the Everglades, so on and so forth. And it seems to me that one of the things that indigenous knowledges do, and I'm going to go back, so I'm kind of going full circle. I'm going back to that first point, and that is that we acknowledge, we see the world through human eyes, but someone's, you know, people have talked about two-eye seeing. You know, you can, you know, not just see through one lens, but two lenses. And I think one of the things that I think about and that is important to express to people who want to try to understand is the fact that, yes, we acknowledge, we see the world through human eyes, but it makes a big difference if you acknowledge there are other persons sensing life on the planet that experience the world very differently than we do, and they have knowledges from that too. To me, that is a critical thing to understand, and that's then where we open up this notion to talking about the gifts we receive from the plants, from the animals, from the land, from the air, from the water. And I don't call that romanticism. I call that indigenous realism, that we're making a claim that, hey, you want to really understand, you know, our situation on the planet? Maybe a good way to do it is to look at our relationality with all of this life around us and then realize if we could just be mindful and pay attention, we're larger of a much larger community in which we have responsibilities that, although we're a powerful part of that community, that ecosystem, that life system community, that you can realize that we've really been behaving, a lot of us on the planet, humankind, have been behaving pretty badly because we haven't been mindful of those relatives when we think they're simply resources. And I think that that's really worth emphasizing because, you know, we talk a lot, Melanie, about community health, and I think we should. But in an indigenous way of thinking, community health is as much about the land, the air, the water, the plants and animals as it is our human health and alone. Because how can we be healthy if all of those relatives are not well. And so I think that community element, expanding our notion of ethics and responsibility to include a community larger than just a human community. Mhm.
I don't mean to interrupt, and I think, thank you both so much. This has been, wow, and incredible to hear all of this. I want to be respectful of your time as well. I know, Daniel, you'll have to leave soon, and we were getting so many wonderful questions. If you don't
Okay.
mind, we go. One's going to be just a clarifying question. Melanie, you did mention a couple, the tribal adaptation menu, and I just wanted to make sure which one it was, because we got that question of if it's the tribal climate adaptation menu that you referenced earlier.
Yeah, they're basically the same thing, tribal adaptation menu, tribal climate adaptation menu, and it can be found on Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission website, as well as if you simply search on Google for tribal climate adaptation menu, it'll come up and there's a PDF that you can download.
Great, we can definitely share that link. And you also mentioned the federally related memo, which I think is the one that the White House guidance, and
Yeah.
just yes.
OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, in early December put out a really, really useful statement, working with people like Kyle White. I know many of you know Kyle, Citizens Band Potawatomi gentleman who's done a lot of work in the area of environmental justice and indigenous knowledges, but he and other people sort of helped advise that. And if you're not familiar with it, just go to OSTP, the Office for Science and Technology Policy, and they're really setting the bar high, I think, for how we can incorporate these knowledges. Yes.
And we'll be covering that a little bit more in future webinars in the series as well. But I just want to make sure folks knew what you were mentioning there. And jumping into another question,
Okay.
says, in what ways might collaborations between scientific knowledge and Indigenous knowledges support or benefit Indigenous communities?
Well, that's the key thing. I mean, I think that should be, when you come to us and we work on building that relationship, it's not like, what can you do for me? I mean, it's like developing the question, how can we benefit? And it's important to listen to the issues that people on the ground can tell you are their concern. And so, that would be my thought about that. I mean, that's what's important. The most important communication skill you will need when you start trying to build these relationships is listening. You're going to have to be a good listener, a good observer. Sometimes just be quiet, observe, and listen.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to add to that just a little bit and say, it's not an easy answer to say the ways that can benefit are A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Because it really depends on those relationships that are being built and what needs the Indigenous communities have. And that will help determine, what those benefits are, and also how those relationships are maintained as the work moves forward. That will also determine those benefits. Like, you can draw benefits out for, say, a grant proposal and say what they're going to be, but a lot of times the benefits that occur are things you wouldn't even imagine, and including some of the lifelong relationships that you develop.
Thank you. Another individual asked, one of the hardest parts of relationship building seems to be high turnover within or between different tribal offices. For example, food sovereignty program leaders. What are the best practices for establishing meaningful relationships when there's a high turnover in leadership?
Well, I think so. I'm gonna give you my advice, and then Melanie can give her take on this. But I would say you've got to become known in the community. Yes, it's great to have a friend who can introduce you sort of to the community and welcome you. But remember, it's the community that you're really building a relationship with. And so I'd say, know the community, okay?
Absolutely, because, it's not about those individuals necessarily. Relationships in it to a certain extent are about building relationships with those individuals. But yeah, as he said, it's about building those relationships with the community. And the other thing to think about is change is inevitable. Like, it's going to happen no matter what. And it happens everywhere. It happens in federal agencies. It happens, with, yeah, thank you. It's okay. Sorry, I'm in a restaurant right now. It's okay. Yeah, but change is going to happen no matter what. And so, yeah, definitely just to shadow that, what's important is building those relationships with that community and being that constant present yourself, regardless of who's, the chairman or who's whatever. And you're going to experience different expectations because of that. You're going to experience different rules because of that. But keep in mind that there's always going to be change everywhere you go. And what's important is to have good intentions, be true, be honest, be respectful, act with kindness, and be flexible as well and open to that change.
I gotta admit, I mean, it puts a smile on my face because I was gonna say, boy, we know how consistent those leaders of federal agencies are with every change of administration, don't we? Boy, they just really keep, the consistent policies throughout. Now, sometimes they turn on a dime and you're kind of wondering, so that's an issue, but you just learn it, by building, knowing the community, knowing the organization. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question is Indigenous knowledge rooted in tradition, spirituality, or is it rooted in contemporary personal experience? It seems like there are two types of this knowledge, that which is passed down and that which is learned from living on the lands and waters. Okay,
I'm going to give you my short answer because then I've got a hard stop. I've got to go pick up my granddaughter. Okay. Here's my answer. It's both. It's not either or. And this is one of the riddles. See, there's a great article. I think you can find it online free. And it's kind of shocking when you read the title, but it's by Osage theologian George Tinker. And he wrote an article in a publication we're both in called Buffalo Shout, Salmon Cry. And it was a dialogue between traditional Christian traditions and indigenous traditions, published in Canada, by the way. It was a Canadian effort. And he wrote this thing on why I do not believe in a creator. And you're kind of reading about, here's a theologian, he says he does not believe in a creator. And what he does is to say, yeah, there's some power, there's something, but we never thought of creator as a man with a long flowing white hair and a long white beard. And we think of this power throughout everything. And he goes through and kind of discusses that. And the one thing that I know Zoe Ha people honor, and I'm sure Melanie's people too, is we never thought that we were separate when we were in the natural world from a spiritual reality. That is a spiritual reality. That'd be a whole nother program to talk about, but I'm going to stop there. I'll let Melanie go in and kind of elaborate on that. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. And I'm glad to virtually, be here with all of you relatives. We are all related. Let's not forget it. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. It's been a wonderful pleasure. Great conversation.
Yeah, Melanie, we'll pick it up, okay?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for joining us.
You
and
bet.
Melanie, you have another 5 minutes. We can do a couple more questions or,
Okay.
with your time constraints as well.
Yeah, sounds good. I can definitely stay on. I may not be able to answer all the questions, but we'll see. I'll do my best. But yeah, I just wanted to shadow that what Dan said to that last question just quickly too, because as soon as the question was coming out, I was just smiling to myself, and well, both of us, you could see we were smiling because like this gets asked a lot, and I love the question because people are wondering like that's why it's difficult. You can't really define Indigenous knowledges. There is no one set definition. So because of that, it leaves people really struggling with like, is it this path or that path, or is it a combination or what? And for us, it's like, it's all of it, because again, we're an adaptive people, we're learning as we go. So
Thank you. There was a question of, I see scientists ask about what is important to the community, and the members struggle with how these questions are asked. Would you speak on how Indigenous knowledges are holistic and everything is important and not siloed into sectors?
yeah, that's definitely a whole nother conversation within itself for sure, but I can say a few things. And for me, it often feels like such separate worlds. And that's again why I struggle and why I have struggled with academia and things, because as humans, we like to separate things. We like to like organize them and all of that. But, you know, when it comes to Indigenous people, everything is holistic and interconnected, and we see it in our everyday lives as we go. And yet has its own organized facet, and things are siloed, but those silos are interconnected. And so one thing, like what helps again, is when you're working with, say, academics, scientists, federal agencies and things, is to, build that relationship, learn from each other as you go, and eventually you can see the links between things that are siloed that really should be brought together. And I know agencies, especially for a management reason and purpose, they're so set on making silos within their agencies. And a lot of times some of those divisions are so bizarre to me. Like you'll have water and you'll have soils, but like in my mind, the two are connected and then they don't even talk to each other. And we need to really step back and look at how to reorganize systems, and how to, and if we're not going to reorganize, at least how to interconnect with each other a lot more and think about, the interplay between all of them.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm curious to learn the panel's perspectives on some of the ways that those working from Western science perspectives can show their generosity when gifted with Indigenous knowledge.
I don't know. A lot of our talk, during this time has been about relationships, and I go back to that even for this as well, because I think about some of the folks from federal agencies that I met probably 25 years ago, through work, and they had just been these agency people, right? But we call each other and tell each other happy birthday now. And it's just like, I've developed some lifelong friends through some of these organizations, and it's because of those relationships. And I think that has made our work a lot more effective as we've moved forward too, because we learn about who each other are, not just about what each other's roles are in certain positions, but we've really connected over time. And if we're passing through each other's towns or whatever, we'll call each other up and actually visit and connect via social media. Of course, the evil technology and all that, but it has its wonderful ways too. But yeah, it's really good to build those relationships and not look at each other as somebody who just has a job or just a certain hat that they're wearing or a certain name, for their title. So.
Thank you. And I know you touched upon this a little bit as well, but how can you reconcile ethical differences between Indigenous nations and partnering organizations? For example, academia, for instance, knowledge ownership and control. And I think there were a couple questions in that same vein of within a trusted partnership, since once the knowledge is published, it can take on a life or path of its own. So what is suggested guidance for that?
I don't know if I'm going to speak to this enough and correctly enough, because I feel like it's a major topic and involves a lot of discussion. But one thing I think is constantly going back to those people that you obtain the knowledge from, to make sure, as we talked earlier, that you're using it in the way that you had asked, the way that you had intended. But also, again, to hold that knowledge in a way of respect rather than look at it as this resource. And, really communicate with those people after you obtain that knowledge, why it's being effective and how it's being used. For example, if you gather knowledge from somebody and you create like a certain publication and you're out there presenting on it and you're getting a lot of positive feedback, it's important to go back to those individuals you obtain that knowledge from and share those experiences with them and say, I was talking to so-and-so about something that you taught me, and that made me think of this, or then we had this question, and it just, or yeah, obviously we keep going back to relationships, but that's all part of it too.
Thank you. And one last one. How do you see the land management agencies changing their culture and perspective from looking at the environment as using resources to respect and reciprocity?
That's a big question. How do I dream of it being, or how do I see it currently? Or, and I know that it probably wasn't specific, but I say that, because there's so many different ways to look at it. There's ways to look at it right now and ways to look at what it could become, based on what I may dream of things to be. But the hope is, I guess, especially from, as an Indigenous person speaking for myself, that a lot of the agency folks and agencies themselves will start waking up and realizing that all of these beings out there aren't resources. They aren't simply to be extracted, but if we're gonna, take them, we need to use them in a sustainable way, and we need to offer gifts to them, however that may be, depending on what your culture is, your values, whatever. But to give something in return, because that's part of why we're down this path right now, because we've taken advantage of so much and we've just like assumed that these resources will always be there for us. And what happens at the end of the day, we're waking up and realizing we barely have any cedar left, or we barely have any black ash left, which is another complicated issue. But my hope is that a lot of folks within agencies will become more and more educated and start opening up their eyes and realizing that the jobs that they hold, they may be getting them a paycheck, but they also hold many responsibilities with them: ethical responsibilities, human responsibilities, responsibilities to the earth, and responsibilities just to be able to care for the future generations. So remember, when you're getting that paycheck, that you actually hold a lot of responsibility in all that's around you and carrying out that job that you are.
Thank you so much. And as we come to the end of our webinar, I just wanted to, again, take a moment to thank you for taking the time to participate and to share this wonderful information with all of us. And if possible, I believe Shannon with NCTC. I'm so sorry, and I apologize. I don't think I ever properly introduced myself. I'm Elder Verlamander with the National Climate Adaptation Science Center. And I, with our planning committee, came together to create this series that we're so excited about, and we're glad that it's been so well received and that we have wonderful individuals participating in it, such as yourself. And wanted to announce that we have upcoming webinars within this series that will address some of the questions that came up. I know it's hard to really address everything at once, but we're trying to help clarify as much as we can some of these matters. And oh, thank you. Yes, so as you can see, we're posting this on a bi-weekly basis. We have 5 total webinars in the series. The next one will be April 20th, and we'll focus on understanding federal guidance on engaging with Indigenous knowledges, which is, again, the item that you mentioned earlier on the White House guidance as well. And May 4th, tribal policies around Indigenous knowledges. May 18th, we'll have some case studies of successful Indigenous knowledges engagement. And we'll end the series on June 1st with best practices for engaging tribal nations and Indigenous peoples surrounding Indigenous knowledges. So thank you everyone who joined today. Thank you again to Melanie for joining us, and Daniel got to step away, but thank you so much. And we hope to see people at future series.
Thank you all. It's been an honor. And I forgot to say it earlier, but I absolutely love that artwork. It's so beautiful. So I don't know, it's a piece of work. So yeah, let the artists know that it's lovely. It's been a great honor. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to Coral Avery, our artist who led that effort and created something that was so well received.